needless to say, it's a great honor to be here surrounded by everybody. And I think, we're sort of here and this is forward looking, right? We're at this retreat. But I want to just stop for a minute and pause and say, I think it's really important we learn from where we've come, right? And a lot of us are kind of from advertising, or we've been in this space in general. And we've gone through this maturation of kind of first display, right? And then there was search. And these sort of merger spaces, and then it was social, and the next wave is kind of video, right? So video's the belle of the ball of our time, and perhaps I would suggest to you that we're the parents or maybe the grandparents of it, right, or the elder sisters. And so it's a very fortunate and blessed time for us to be here. I sort of had this idea of what I was going to say coming into this, and then I was fortunate enough to sit beside Lisa Shaw on the plane yesterday on the way in, and that kind of changed my thing. And then I was lying awake last night because there were some very angry roosters in the area of the barrio which I'm sleeping, and I was thinking of Rob Norman. Okay, I was laying awake, no, not actually thinking of Rob Norman, but a conversation I had with Rob Norman yesterday and Mitchell. And so he's up next. We're chatting next. So I wanted to make sure he was off his footing to make it start well. We were having a conversation, and I was telling him about my background. My first life was in manufacturing finance, and one of my favorite places in the world is on a manufacturing floor. And I'm talking about the tangible sort of affirmation of being able to hold something in your product and say, I built this. And that's sort of hard in our industry, right? I mean, we make video, we make campaigns, we make messages, we make ideas. And they're not really tangible, right, when you compare it to sort of endemic industry. So Rob looks at me and, very gently says, so what the hell are you doing on the internet? And kind of thought about it for a minute, and I was like, well, and I gave him the reason I got here. And so while I was lying awake last night, I was thinking of the fact that actually he could have posed that question to probably most of us in this room, and we sort of would have had to pause for a minute and share the fact that we ended up here unexpectedly, but here's where we are, and we're all trying to figure it out. And the good news is we're all in the boat rowing together. So I think that's the first thing, and us coming together is an affirmation of that. But it says a lot about our business and our industry and where we are as a point in time, right? It says where we're going from where we've come and where the destination is and how we get there. And I think this is sort of the thematic, and I would suggest that this is a big part of starting that dialogue and having that conversation, right? So I want to talk about the word convergence, because we all just came out of CES, and C is a theme in my conversation, so you'll see that come around later. So convergence, right? Back in the early 2000s when I was working in the handset side of the business in consumer electronics for Sony, and it was when 2.5G devices were going to 3G, we were talking about convergence then, right? It just meant something different, and as we all know, it's been the year of mobile for the last 10 years. So convergence in that definition has meant something, and then we talk about it today. Sidebar, I moved this weekend, and no internet, no cable, so my boyfriend was having like a bad reaction to not having Red Zone on Verizon, and we're struggling. So we ended up like lying in our new king-size bed, watching an episode of Treme on HBO Go on my Galaxy S3. It was a very romantic moment, but that was my choice over a Super Bowl metaphor to kick it off, which was his recommendation, to be clear. That's convergence. The fluidity of content and experience and sort of that ebb and flow and dynamic nature of where we are at a point in time of information, right? And I think that's what's really important, because what I've heard so much of is I heard even in Rob's last interview, right? I hear about technology and innovation, and we're all driving an agenda, and that's how we secure VC money, and that's our pitch, et cetera, and that's our platform. The reality is that where we are at a point in time is that audience behaviors and paradigms of consumptions are changing faster than we can keep up. And I can tell you, coming from consumer electronics and taking products to market, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when you're an innovator, when you were an HP or you were Sony, or the first iterations of Samsung and LG when they were still just Korean companies, it was about creating a demand in the marketplace. That was the purpose of marketing and advertising, because still even today, nobody really needs a connected TV, right? But somebody will buy a TV for design and definition because the viewing experience is better, and that's why from 2011 to 2012 at CES, these guys retrenched from, instead of selling apps, they were selling TV again, right? So today what's happening is my experience with Treme was that I basically switched off my iOS platform, went from AT&T to T-Mobile to get grandfathered into an all-you-can-eat data plan at 69 bucks. I got a bigger screen, and I wanted to watch TV, and I didn't have a cable subscription. So I figured it out. Nobody did that for me. Technology was an enabler, but technology sure as hell didn't make it possible by virtue of educating me as a consumer and pureeing it, giving me the spoon and feeding it to me as well, right? And I think this is really important because this is what's keeping marketers and content creators on their toes and really forcing what are radical changes in the economies and the business models of how we function and how we operate, right? And that's the big epiphany. It's not technology, it's not bandwidth, et cetera. You know, it's the fact that right now at a point in time, our business is going through a seismic shift, and we have to figure out how to ride that wave or otherwise we're going to drown, right? But the reality is that by virtue of us and who we are at this point in time, and if you're watching, we're probably actually quite fortunate. I know it feels really hard and it's like a linear equation with a bunch of variables and we're all trying to optimize the outcome, but actually we're at the opportunistic side of the wave, right? We're right at sort of where it's taking off, not at its crest. And it's opportunistic because we're still in an illiquid market for video. There's a shortage of premium content, which means the marketplace where we talked about with Joanna, the supply and demand curve meeting, it's actually at a higher price point that is going to be sustainable, right? So at the end of the day, we've probably got it easy. And we're extracting as much sort of economic and real financial value from the ecosystem in its early stages. The reality is that it's going to get harder. And that's what I think is important about forums and sort of get-togethers like this, is that it's going to get harder for all of us. And sharing is caring, and understanding that we function as an ecosystem. And the reality is that because there are so many interdependencies, if you just talk about programmatic buying, right? Sort of everybody is some part of something else. It all melds together, and by virtue of that, we have a number of interdependencies in this emerging medium of video and how advertising is changing today, and it requires an entire new different set of skills, so there is greater reliance and interdependency. It's interesting that we're here to solve problems, but we're also here to sort of maximize the amount of benefit that we can extract. And it's an interesting conundrum that it's not about protectionist behavior anymore or opportunistic. It's really about collaborative and sort of co-creation, right? If we're the dirty little secret that we all acknowledge we don't talk about is that we all really want to figure out whether we're print now moving to tablet or we're TV now moving to TV everywhere. We all kind of want to figure out how we crack the nut for digital and now video to have the grandeur and the promise of old world legacy P&Ls and sustainable revenue streams, right? And most importantly, margins. Let's talk about cable, right? Cable is what it is and has been what it is and is going to be protected. And if you've ever gone to NAB, you know that. There's so much money invested in legacy copper infrastructure. And the reality is that once that investment was made, it was a sunk cost. So every incremental subscriber drops right to the bottom line. It's not the way it works in digital. That's why the promise of 4K TVs at CES this year is a very, sort of lofty dream, because the cost of serving content that is 4K or 10 times 1080 DPI, when 1080 DPI is incredibly cost prohibitive for small companies to actually serve and deliver, is why we're all challenged with figuring this out together, right? So it's a huge shift. And the reality is that I don't think that video is really just a new format or a new medium of advertising. I don't really think that it's a sort of a maturation of digital. I really think that it's a new industry and a new business. And with that comes a new model of doing business, very different economics, and a very different rules of sort of engagement and how we partner and collaborate, and we build a value chain around video as a new industry. So I learned a lot by starting Furious Minds when I left Digitas in May of last year, and I was sort of like, we're Switzerland, right? Which is really a really valued place to be for me. I treasure it because I actually can, with credibility, tell you that my partner and I and my team, we have a 30,000-foot view of the industry, right? Because no longer, because I'm not on the media buying side of the business, are people selling me. They're actually sharing with me. So I get to hear the spectrum, right, as does my team, from clients, from peers, from colleagues, through the work that I'm privileged to be able to share with Andy on Beat. And so I hear the excitement, I hear the hunger, I hear the elation, I hear the dismay, I hear the frustration. I hear this sort of, discouragement. It's all over the board, right? And at the end of the day, the common thread, though, that I've extracted, which is sort of what triggered this, and it was affirmed with a conversation I had with Lisa on the plane, is this, this epiphany and this sort of point of arrival is that it's not about digital video, it's not about data, it's not about advertising, it's not about technology, it's just about solving really hard business problems that probably many other industries have had to solve before, just in a different construct, right? And we have this hubris in advertising and in media that we don't really look to other industries that are slightly less sexy because they may involve people getting their hands like literally dirty to actually learn from, right? And we, I think this is a sort of a moment in time for us to actually look at redefining, how and what we do and how other industries have had to do that and how they've gone about doing that, right? So anybody that's watched my content or sort of sees me is, I've learned from being in the client services business that I feel like there should be at least one thing that you take away, right? So I usually do punch lists. So my punch list I came up with was kind of the 10 C's. That was my thematic, right? And I'm just gonna take you through that. If you take away anything, I think this is the valuable stuff, right? So my first C, consumer. It starts, it ends. Whether it's a person or participant with whom you're having a conversation, an audience member, it starts and ends with the consumer. And they're gonna outsmart you, and they are outsmarting you every day, which is why we've gotta work harder and get bigger, faster, and stronger. Collaboration. It's a collaborative economy, who sort of, you watch enough TED Talks, you hear that. But in real terms, this is about partnership. Stephanie led with it, and I suspect that's where it will continue and be threaded throughout our conversations today. But we have to collaborate because this idea of sort of, the reality is Rome is falling, and Rome begins with a G. And the reality is that tonnage doesn't make for a sustainable business model of revenue that really works or is premium in nature, right? And that said, we need to work together. Co-creation. Content's expensive. It's hard, right? And the reality is that the proliferation of platforms and screens and the ever-increasing voracious appetite of audiences to consume video means that if you really want marketers to get on board, you gotta help them. And the way that you help them is not by cannibalizing agency business, but bringing every stakeholder the partner to help create more content and really deliver to a constant communications sort of promise or value proposition. And that's not easy. It goes back to collaboration and why getting more smart people at the table is going to get us there faster. Channel. It matters. This ubiquity of video everywhere, great. I think that is sort of where we are as a point in time. But the reality is that as a marketer or an advertiser, if you ignore the platform to which you're delivering a marketing message and where that piece of hardware falls in the consumption paradigm of whether it's while I'm watching television, it's after I've watched television, it's an ebb and flow dynamic nature of, that sort of sequence, it's important. And ignoring that and really ignoring the investment in creative optimization and bespoke creative for channel or platform, I think is very short-sighted for us as an industry. And if we choose to embrace it now, it will pay dividends downstream, both in the performance of our media and the ROI and investments for advertisers. And that's how we all win and get more dollars. Compensation, I think there's two parts to that, right? One is how we get paid and how we make money as suppliers or vendors to marketers and agencies. We're gonna have to get paid differently, and we're probably gonna have to be way more receptive to getting paid based on performance. The other thing is, if you're here and you're from a large company, you're a large media company that is, moving into video or going from print and straddling the chasm or TV, et cetera, you've gotta think about how you incentivize your teams as well. So compensation sort of goes a lot further as to beyond just how we make money. It's how we incentivize the folks that work for us and actually help build these new businesses and establish these new models. Capital. So what's so interesting about advertising and advertising technology and video is that it is funded by folks that have never spent a day in our industry, right? And so having been on the buying side of the business, one of the reasons I left was because every day I listened to really incredible innovators and technologies, builders and founders, had great ideas, great products, knew very little about advertising or technology, although they took money for the purpose of building a business that was advertising or revenue-based, right? So it was very hard for me to ingest that. I had to do a lot of heavy lifting, right, on the buying side. And what I'm saying about my sort of capital note is that if we really want to accelerate the market holistically, then we've got to eat our own dog food and figure out how to actually buy emerging platforms and integrate them into the way we do business and operationalize them so that we can, in fact, act as catalysts of innovation on the demand side of the house, rather. And then also, you know, it's just, we have to be able to just absorb new products, right? Like, we have to be receptive. If we rely on the 25-year-old that lives under the Manhattan Bridge and wears her sister's jeans to fit it into a spreadsheet, we're probably going to be in trouble. No disrespect to my peers that I adore. I'm now a Brooklynite as well, right? So the other thing is currencies, which is, you know, where we started. So you, as a brand, as a marketer, there has to be a value exchange. And the value exchange goes beyond what you're actually giving a consumer and what you're delivering, but it's also amongst ourselves to one another. You know, so whatever you're trying to sell or whatever you're trying to deliver, there has to be value there inherently. Utility isn't enough anymore. Again, we're not a commoditized market yet, right? So we have to move up the food chain. Consolidation is going to be big. The market will not settle for, specifically, let's look at programmatic buying, for end-to-end solutions only being available through, you know, the big media conglomerates of the world, or the portals, or now Facebook, right? At the end of the day, consolidation will occur because it's not fair to expect the burden of acceleration of an industry to be borne by the publishers and content creators, or only by those that are spending money and have the paychecks. So we've got to take ownership in between. And if we allow our destiny to be driven by someone else and not actually accelerate that ourselves, we'll sort of be beholden to an agenda that is that of, again, it goes back to folks that have never spent a day in advertising, right? We're an industry right now that is very much so driven by the venture capital market. How do we get into more of a driver's seat there? I think there's an opportunity for us to take ownership and drive our own destiny. I like a Cartesian sort of approach to existence, and so control your own destiny. Costs. You know, this is about operations. It's expensive. So there's another great opportunity to find efficiencies in partnership, is to look at the cost of delivering content, the cost of procurement as well. These are old, big industry problems that we've been trying to solve since the Industrial Revolution. It's not rocket science, right? So look at your endemic business and how do you actually become more efficient on delivery? How do you become more efficient on serving, on buying, or on building and creating as well? And the last is just change, because change is really hard, but that's sort of what we're in the midst of, right? A big change. And the greatest revelation I had a little while out of the agency and sort of starting, you know, again, starting my own shop, was that a lot of what my clients were trying to do was less about solve a technology problem or figure out their advertising strategy, but it was just change management. It was getting a culture of a company to re-identify itself, to retool and reposition, to endeavor upon a new business and a new way of doing business, right? And we're all in the midst of that, and we're all moving at lightning speed. But if you go back to an office where you've got a large team, you have to recognize that and give people safe space and comfort to actually sort of move forward and help forward your agenda as well.